By 1967, the Corgi factory in Swansea employed 3,500 workers on a site opened by King George VI. They cast molten zinc into precision moulds and assembled miniature cars by hand. The James Bond DB5 with its working ejector seat. The Batmobile, chitty chitty bang bang, heavy in the palm, cold to the touch. 17.5 million sold in a single year. Then the decisions began. A Californian rival rewrote the market overnight. A warehouse fire destroyed a year's stock. A home computer was built to save the company and had to be sold to fund its death. The company that made the weapon that killed British diecast bought the corpse, closed the Welsh factory, and moved production to China. Today, the Fforestfach site is a vehicle repair yard. There is no plaque. The building was demolished after a fire in 5,000 tons of shredded tyres. This is the story of two Jewish refugees who fled Nazi Germany, named their company after a Welsh dog, and built an empire that produced over 1 billion toys, and of how everything they made was taken apart piece by piece until only the zinc remained. Chapter 1. The Toy Maker and the Tin Hitler. The story begins with an escape. Philipp Ullmann was born in 1883 into a German Jewish family in Nuremberg, the city that made the world's finest toys. By 1919, he'd become sole owner of Tip & Company, one of the great tin plate manufacturers. Lithographed cars, clockwork motorcycles, London buses, fire engines. Beautiful things, made by hand, sold across Europe. Ullmann was a toy maker at the summit of his craft, in the capital of his trade. And then the ground shifted beneath him. What Ullmann did next tells you everything about the man. He didn't wait. He planned. On the 31st of August 1932, a full year before he fled Germany, a company called Mettoy was quietly registered in England. The name was a simple portmanteau. The first 3 letters of metal plus toy. The paperwork was filed by Arthur Katz, Ullmann's young cousin by marriage, who held a detail that made the entire scheme possible. Katz had been born in Johannesburg, South Africa. He carried a British passport. Katz went first. He secured workshop space through Winteringham Limited, a subsidiary of the Bassett Loke Model Train Company, at St Andrews Street in Northampton. He established the legal framework. He prepared the ground. And in 1933, Philipp Ullmann gathered his family, his wife Frieda, his son Hans, his daughter Anna, and left Germany for good, assisted across the channel by Lord Simon Marks, co-founder of Marks & Spencer. That connection wasn't merely generous, it was commercially decisive. Marks & Spencer became a major buyer of Mettoy products for decades to come. Ullmann was formally appointed to the Mettoy board on the 10th of October 1933. The company began trading on the 1st of February 1934. He was chairman. Katz, barely 25, was the engine room. Now, here's the detail that turns a business story into something else entirely. After Ullmann fled, the Nazis seized Tip & Company. They placed it under the control of Ernst Horn, a former director of the collapsed Bing Toy Company. And they turned Ullmann's life's work into a propaganda machine. The factory that had produced beautiful tin plate motorcycles and clockwork racing cars now manufactured staff cars, troop transporters, tanks, anti-aircraft guns, and the infamous Führerwagen Mercedes, a tin model of Hitler's parade car, complete with tiny figurines performing the Nazi salute. Ullmann's own factory, making tin Hitlers. Meanwhile, across the channel, in a modest Northampton workshop, the same man's new company was making toys whose profits were channeled directly into funding the escape of other Jewish refugees from Germany. The same hands, the same craft. One company perverted into a tool of the regime, the other building something new, and using the proceeds to pull people out of the darkness. Mettoy grew fast. By February 1936, Ullmann and Katz had moved to larger premises on Stimpson Avenue with 50 workers. By 1937, they'd moved again, to Harleston Road, St James End. By 1939, the workforce had reached 600. The products were traditional Nuremberg-style toys, Clockwork cars, lorries, aeroplanes, toy trains, even toy typewriters branded Mettype. One observer noted that if it weren't for the Made in England stamp, you could be forgiven for mistaking some of the tin plate motorcycles as having come from a smaller German maker. This wasn't imitation, it was continuation. The Nuremberg tradition, transplanted to English soil by the men the Nuremberg regime had driven out. When war came again in 1939, toy production ceased entirely by 1941. Mettoy turned to munitions, heavy steel jerry can components, shell fuses, mortar carriers, Sten and Bren gun magazines, landmines, and a cooking stove designed for troops fighting in tropical jungles. The company gained a reputation, in the Ministry of Supply's own assessment, for the speed and success with which it solved precision engineering problems. A toy company founded by refugees, helping to defeat the regime that had stolen everything from them. Philippe Ullmann would live to see his new creation become one of the most successful toy companies in British history. He retired as chairman in 1969 and died on the 20th of September 1971, aged 88, the same year Mettoy reported its first ever trading loss. Arthur Katz, who'd arrived from South Africa as a boy of 12, who'd learned the toy trade at Ullmann's knee in Nuremberg, who'd used his British passport to make the entire escape possible. He became one of the most decorated figures in British manufacturing. OBE in 1961, CBE in 1973, President of the British Toy Manufacturers Association. A visiting American export executive touring the Mettoy factory at its peak described what he saw in 5 words: like General Motors, but in miniature. Katz died in London on the 25th of June 1999, aged 91. By then, everything he'd built was gone. Chapter 2. The Factory. The King opened. In 1944, the Ministry of Supply erected a 28,000 square foot factory at Fforestfach, on the western outskirts of Swansea, for wartime munitions work. The location wasn't random. The Swansea area sat at the heart of South Wales's tin plate and metalworking belt. The raw materials were already there, and the communities surrounding the factory were desperate for work. Coal mining was scaling down. Unemployment was rising. The government's post-war Board of Trade offered concessions on machinery, building costs, rentals, and tax exemptions to steer light manufacturing into areas where heavy industry was dying. It was a deliberate act of economic transplantation, and for 3 decades it worked. In 1948, Mettoy began constructing a new purpose-built factory on the Fforestfach site, 115,000 square feet of modern production space designed with internal conveyor belts for linear workflow, large windows flooding the floor with natural light, and machinery painted in light colours, as the company put it, for a restful effect on the operators. On the 2nd of April 1949, King George VI officially opened the building. A factory built to make toys, opened by a king, in a valley where men had once gone underground to dig coal. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. The expansion never stopped. 200,000 square feet by 1952, when Fforestfach became company headquarters. Over 240,000 by 1961. 385,000 square feet of combined factory and warehouse space by 1968, with an additional 48,000 at Skewen, near Neath, from 1973. A new state-of-the-art die-casting foundry was built in 1974. Each expansion was a vote of confidence, in the workforce, in the location, in the product. But a factory, however vast, needs something to fill it. And in 1955, Mettoy's designers began drawing something that would change the company's fortunes entirely. Chapter 3. The Ones with Windows. Marcel René van Kleempert arrived in England from France in 1935, aged 9. He spoke exactly 2 words of English: yes and Christmas. He joined Mettoy on the 1st of January 1954, and over the next 29 years designed or oversaw every single Corgi model the company ever produced, every one. The workers called him Mr. Corgi. It fitted. The name itself was chosen from a list of roughly 70 candidates. Sources argue over who made the final pick: Philip Ullman, Arthur Katz, or Ullman's son Henry. It was likely a collective decision, and the reasoning was sound on 3 counts. The name was short and catchy, echoing the rhythmic punch of Dinky. It referenced the Welsh Corgi, honouring the factory's home. And it carried a royal family association, the Pembroke Welsh Corgi being the Queen's favoured breed. A Welsh dog for a Welsh factory with a nod to the crown. Not bad for a word of 5 letters. Corgi Toys launched on the 9th of July 1956. The first models were all familiar British vehicles: the Ford Consul, the Austin A50 Cambridge, the Morris Cowley, the Vauxhall Velux, the Rover 90, each costing 3 shillings. First-year sales hit roughly 2.75 million units in the UK alone. Respectable numbers. But it was the detail that nobody else offered which turned respectable into dominant. Transparent plastic windows. No die-cast toy had ever had them. Dinky Toys, the market leader since 1934, used solid metal castings. You peered into the cockpit and saw nothing but zinc. Matchbox, trading since 1952, did the same. Corgi's windows were the result of a quiet piece of corporate engineering by Katz himself. In 1949, he'd independently founded Playcraft Toys Limited to explore plastic products. When Playcraft merged with Mettoy, the fusion gave Corgi something neither rival could easily replicate: metalworking expertise married to plastics capability. The advertising slogan wrote itself: "The ones with windows." It became synonymous with the brand, and then, year by year, Van Kleemput and his team opened up a technological lead that Dinky spent the rest of its existence trying to close. In October 1959, the Renault Floride arrived with Glidomatic spring suspension and fully detailed interiors. In February 1960, the Aston Martin DB5 introduced the first opening bonnet. By April 1961, the Bentley Continental Sports Saloon offered steerable front wheels, jewelled headlights, and an opening boot with a spare wheel inside. In October 1962, the Superior ambulance carried Transo Light illuminating headlamps, a fibre optic system that actually worked. And by October 1963, the Ghia L6.4 featured opening doors, bonnet, and boot, a detailed interior with rear-view mirror and folding seats, and, a touch of pure whimsy, a tiny Corgi dog sitting on the rear parcel shelf. Here's a number that captures the scale of what was happening. The real Ghia L6.4 was an ultra-exclusive Italian Grand Tourer. Only 25 were ever built. Corgi sold approximately 1,750,000 miniature versions. 70,000 toy cars for every real one. Corgi deliberately modelled vehicles that Dinky hadn't issued, broadening the market rather than fighting head-on. They were smarter, faster, more inventive, and in 1957 they did something else that nobody in the British die-cast industry had attempted. They put Corgi Toys on television. The first TV advertising campaign made the brand a household name overnight. A Corgi model club launched in December 1956, with quarterly magazines from the summer of 1959, building a collector community years before the phrase brand loyalty entered marketing vocabulary. By 1964, the range had expanded downward with the Husky line, sold exclusively through Woolworths to compete with Matchbox's pocket money market. It was later rebranded Corgi Juniors. The ambition was total market coverage, premium models for collectors, mid-range for children, pocket money impulse buys for everyone else. But the product that would define Corgi forever, the one that turned a successful toy company into a cultural phenomenon, arrived in 1965, and it very nearly didn't happen at all. Chapter 4. When Corgi struck gold. Somebody at Mettoy saw Goldfinger shortly before it opened in September 1964, and had an idea. What if Corgi made the car? The Aston Martin DB5, Bond's car, with working gadgets? Director Howard Fairbairn said no. Too complex, too risky, too tight a timeline. A new Corgi model normally took 12 months or more from concept to production, and Christmas was already bearing down. Then Goldfinger became a global smash. And in February 1965, with roughly 7 months until the Christmas rush, the project was greenlit. Pattern maker John Marshall, who joined Mettoy in 1961, was handed the engineering challenge. The ejector seat, the feature every child in Britain would remember for the rest of their lives, had to work. A spring-loaded mechanism, operated by a small red button on the roof, firing a plastic baddie figure clean through an opening panel. Marshall engineered the entire mechanism in a single week. He did it by modifying the existing DB4 casting. The visual differences between the DB4 and DB5 were slight, mainly at the front, so only a new nose die was needed. The DB4 and its competition variant were immediately withdrawn from the range to free up tooling. Designer Tim Richards, looking back years later, called it a botch job, to be honest. That botch job became the most famous die-cast toy car ever made. The number 261 James Bond Aston Martin DB5 comprised 28 separate parts. It cost approximately £45,000 to tool. It retailed at 9 shillings and 11 pence, roughly a month's pocket money in 1965. For that, a child got a gold-painted die-cast body with a spring-loaded ejector seat, a pop-up rear bulletproof shield activated by pressing the twin exhaust pipes, front-mounted retractable machine guns, telescopic bumper overriders, a James Bond driver figure, a spare baddie figure, secret instructions, and a 007 lapel sticker. The gold was an accident. In the films, Bond's DB5 was silver birch. When Corgi's management saw the silver factory prototypes, they felt they looked too much like base metal, as if the car hadn't been painted at all. With Christmas weeks away, a snap decision. Paint it gold. Gold looked special. Gold connected to the title. It took until 2024, 59 years, for Corgi to finally release a number 261 in the silver that Bond actually drove. Sales were beyond anything anyone at Fforestfach had imagined. In the first 7 weeks, October to Christmas 1965, 750,000 units sold, 750,000. Stocks were completely exhausted by Christmas Day. Shifts at the factory extended deep into the night, with lorries waiting on standby for morning delivery. Advertising manager Bill Baxter told the Daily Mirror, "We never in our wildest dreams expected such phenomenal sales. We have now doubled production, but many children will not be able to get one for Christmas." During the peak of the Christmas rush, the factory was producing 10,000 Bond cars a day. By February 1968, when the number 261 was finally retired, just under 3,900,000 units had been produced. All versions combined have now passed 7 million. Sam Mendes, who would direct Skyfall decades later, put it simply, "The DB5 is part of my boyhood, and it's part of my generation's boyhood. I had the toy with the ejector seat and spent the rest of my childhood looking for the little man behind various sofas." James May included it in his list of the most important cars ever made, alongside the Ford Model T and the Volkswagen Beetle. Not the real DB5. The toy. The Bond car wasn't a one-off. It was the first crack in a dam. The licensing model, marrying die-cast engineering to the characters children already loved from screen, unleashed a torrent. The Batmobile arrived in October 1966. Based on the car from the Adam West television series, designed by George Barris, it featured a triple rocket launcher with 12 plastic missiles, a pop-out front chain cutter, a pulsating turbo exhaust flame that moved as the car rolled, and hand-painted Batman and Robin figures. The first issue matte black version with red bats on gold wheel hubs was produced for only about 6 months. Mint examples now sell for 4 figures. Total production across all versions reached approximately 4,900,000 to 5 million units, making the Batmobile, not the Bond car, Corgi's actual all-time bestseller. Factory workers transported early Batmobiles around Fforestfach by hand in steel trays, packed metal to metal, each one dinging against its neighbour. The sardonic factory motto passed down through the workforce: If you ever see a mint Corgi, it wasn't made by us. Then came Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in November 1968. Pop-out wings operated by the handbrake lever, snap-on flight stabilizers, 4 character figures. A wealth of gleaming chrome. 2 models were presented to the Queen and Prince Philip, presumably for Princes Andrew and Edward. Over 776,000 units sold before withdrawal in 1972. The Beatles' Yellow Submarine followed in 1969. Die-cast body in yellow, 2 automatically opening hatches, revealing figures of all 4 Beatles, revolving periscopes that bobbed up and down. It now sits in the collections of both Amgueddfa Cymru and the Victoria and Albert Museum. The man from UNCLE Thrush Buster. The Saints Volvo P1800, Corgi's first ever TV licensed model, which sold nearly 1,160,000 units and proved the concept that made the Bond car possible. The Avengers gift set. Steed's Bentley, Emma Peel's Lotus Elan, and 3 tiny black umbrellas. All of it. Every mechanism, every spring, every ejector seat and rotating periscope and pop-out wing. Designed in Northampton, tooled in Swansea, cast in molten zinc, assembled by hand, and shipped from a factory on the western edge of Wales to toy shops across the world. Engineer John Marshall captured the mood of those years with the confidence of a man who couldn't imagine any of it ending. Because there was a huge production run, development costs were negligible. We'd be making millions. So you could come up with neat ideas and the company would say yes. The company said yes to everything. And for a while, everything worked. Chapter 5. Molten zinc and nimble fingers. Imagine standing at the entrance to the Fforestfach foundry on a winter morning in 1967. The smell reaches you first, hot metal, sharp and mineral, the particular tang of zinc heated past 385 degrees. Then the sound. A rhythmic percussive thumping from the die-casting machines, the hiss of compressed air, the metallic clatter of freshly ejected parts dropping into collection trays. The floor vibrates under your feet. This isn't a workshop. It's an industrial operation running at full tilt, and at its peak, the complex sprawled across 385,000 square feet. 4 main factory buildings, warehouses, a tool room, spray booths, assembly lines, packing halls and offices. The process began with Mazak, the British name for Zamak, a zinc alloy running roughly 94 to 96% zinc, with small additions of aluminium, magnesium and copper. Molten Mazak, heated to 400 degrees, was injected under enormous pressure into precision-machined steel moulds cut from H13 grade tool steel. A single mould could survive 750,000 shots before it needed replacing. The injection happened fast, a matter of seconds, and the cooling was aided by water and air channels machined into the mould itself. Parts were ejected by steel pins trimmed of excess flash and sent down the line. Bodies, bases, bumpers, chassis plates, all cast separately, each one requiring its own mould, its own tooling, its own engineering. But the casting was only the beginning. The production chain ran from design to delivery in an unbroken sequence that occupied every corner of the complex. At the Northampton Design Centre, Van Kleemput's team took roughly 70 photographs of each real vehicle and made physical rubbings of complex curves on large sheets of paper. Hardwood masters were carved at 1:12 scale, then reduced to production size by pantograph machines. Precision steel moulds were cut in the toolroom by skilled toolmakers, men who'd served proper apprenticeships, and who understood tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. After casting and trimming, bodies moved to the spray booths. Enamel paint, applied by hand, in dedicated enclosures. Plastic windows, interiors and steering wheels were injection moulded in separate departments. The Playcraft plastics expertise that Katz had built from scratch now integrated into every model that left the factory. Assembly was predominantly manual. The Bond DB5, with its 28 components, its spring mechanisms, its ejector seat, that was fiddly, painstaking work. Then detailing. Transfers, decals, jewelled headlights, chrome-plated bumpers and grills fitted piece by piece. Quality control. Packaging, first in simple boxes, then from December 1966, in the cellophane window boxes that let children see the model before their parents bought it. The workforce that operated this chain was sharply divided. Die casting and the tool room were predominantly male, skilled tradesmen, many of them time-served engineers who'd have found employment in any heavy manufacturing operation in South Wales. The assembly and painting lines were predominantly female. One contemporary account describes the assembly floor as almost entirely female, chosen for their nimble fingerwork. A local commentator was blunter about the economics of it. Especially when you had the men doing coal mining and the steel making, you wanted something for the wives to be doing. So, a lot of toy making was actually the wives, because they had more nimble fingers. Era John started at Mettoy around 1960 for a specific reason. She needed £45 to pay for her daughter Lynn's school trip. She got a job in the warehouse, and the wages kept her coming back. £7 to £9 a week, which was good money. You could do a week's shopping for £5 then. Getting hired was effortless. You could walk into the office and ask if there were any jobs available, be interviewed on the spot. Airlies Lewis worked the assembly line, putting toy cars together, and found the atmosphere stricter than her previous factory. Madge Sinclair, a night shift worker who'd come from Birkenhead, worked her way up to white coat, charge hand on the night shift. These were ordinary women, doing detailed manual work, building something that children across the world were desperate to own. Workers commuted from the surrounding towns, Garnswold, Ammanford, Manselton, Logor, packed into double-decker buses that delivered and collected them at shift change. From outside the factory, you could hear music while you work and workers' playtime drifting through the walls. The Fforestfach trading estate was a full employment world unto itself. Alongside Mettoy sat Addis, Segnuday, Corona, Dan Hansen, Wonderloaf, Louis Marks Toys, Atlas, IC, Hodges and Winsmore. Several thousand people employed on the estate at its peak. Vacancy signs stood outside most of the factories. If you wanted work, there was work. The estate existed because the government had willed it into being. Light manufacturing transplanted into communities where coal mining was dying. It was policy made physical. And for a generation, the policy held. The women who assembled Corgi Toys on the Fforestfach line were doing the work that coal could no longer provide. Their wages kept households together, funded school trips, paid for shopping. The factory hooter that marked the shifts had replaced the colliery siren. Different sound. Same function. Same meaning. There is work here, and the work sustains a life. By 1968, Mettoy employed approximately 3,500 people across all its operations. The Fforestfach factory alone had over 1,000. Corgi was exporting nearly 10 million models a year through distributors in the United States, continental Europe, Scandinavia, Australia and Canada. 3 Queen's Awards for export, 1966, 1967 and 1969, hung on the boardroom wall. And in that same year, 1967, the factory produced its highest ever annual total. 17.5 million models. 17.5 million tiny cars, each one cast in molten zinc, painted by hand, assembled by nimble fingers, boxed, and sent out into the world from a trading estate on the outskirts of Swansea. Chapter 6. The highest point before the fall. In 1966, Corgi won the inaugural Toy of the Year award from the National Association of Toy Retailers. The winning model was the James Bond Aston Martin DB5, the botch job, the rush job, the model that almost never happened. The company also won Best Boys Toy in the range with the highest standard award 4 consecutive years running, from 1966 to 1969. 3 Queen's Awards for export. A factory opened by a king. Products in the permanent collections of national museums. A brand so embedded in British childhood that decades later, grown men would describe the weight of a Corgi car in their palm with the precision of someone recalling their first kiss. The Bond DB5, the Batmobile, the Man from UNCLE Thrushbuster, and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang were all in production simultaneously. The IPO in 1963 had been massively oversubscribed. The Fforestfach complex was still expanding. There was talk of the future, always of the future. A 1969 Mettoy Playcraft publication noted with accidental prophecy. It is possible that in the future, many of the early models will be considered priceless collector's items. This has happened in the motor industry, and there is every indication it is happening in the die-cast model world. They were right about that. They were right about almost everything except the part that mattered. The assumption that any of this would last. Arthur Katz retired as managing director in 1976. His son Peter took over, and in 1978, Peter Katz looked at the figures and declared it the company's best ever year. Profit, £3.5 million. The factory was humming. The order books were full. The brand was known in every toy shop in the Western world. 2 years later, Mettoy posted a loss of £2,800,000. Within 5 years, the company would be dead. The summit is always the place where you can't see the cliff. Chapter 7. The Hot Rod and the Warehouse Fire. On the 18th of May 1968, the same year Corgi was exporting 10 million models and employing 3,500 people, a Californian company called Mattel unveiled a new product at the New York Toy Fair. They called it Hot Wheels. The Brighton Toy Museum's assessment of what happened next is measured, precise, and devastating. Practically an extinction-level event for the traditional British die-cast toys market. What made Hot Wheels lethal wasn't one thing. It was everything, all at once. The cars weren't designed by toy makers. They were designed by legitimate automotive designers. Harry Bentley Bradley, formerly of General Motors, and Ira Guilford, formerly of Chrysler. The engineering was co-created by John W. Ryan, a former missile scientist who'd worked on the AIM-7 Sparrow and the MIM-23 Hawk. This was a toy built with rocket science expertise, and it showed. Hot Wheels offered what Corgi didn't: speed. Thin wire axles and low-friction hard plastic wheels, the Redline design, meant these cars actually moved. Spectraflame transparent metallic finishes made Corgi's careful enamel paintwork look dull by comparison. The proportions were exaggerated. Superchargers, flame paint jobs, the swagger of California hot rod culture rather than the fidelity of a Welsh craftsman reproducing a Vauxhall Velux. A complete play system came with them. Bright orange plastic track with supercharger launchers that sent cars flying across bedroom floors. And the price, 59 cents each. Over 16 million sold in the first year. The fundamental problem ran deeper than any single feature. Corgi and Dinky had been locked in an arms race of realism for a decade. Opening everything, adding trick mechanisms, jewelled headlights, spring suspension. They'd been making ever more faithful miniature replicas of real cars for an audience of children who, it turned out, didn't want faithful miniature replicas at all. As one contemporary commentator put it, it suddenly became terribly clear that what kids really wanted was not the very latest dust cart with opening compartments, but a little shiny hot rod designed to look as exciting as possible. Hot Wheels rendered an entire manufacturing philosophy obsolete overnight. Corgi's responses came fast, but each one missed the mark in its own way. Whiz Wheels arrived in September 1969, low-friction wheels bolted onto existing models. The initial red spot version looked attractive, but cost too much. It was quickly replaced with cheaper all-plastic wheels that gave more play value, but less realism. The product looked cheaper because it was cheaper. Golden Jacks, 7 models with removable detailed wheels on golden metal stands, was clever engineering pointed in completely the wrong direction. Children wanted speed, not removable wheels. The most ambitious response was Corgi Rockets, launched in October 1969. 33 small-scale models with die-cast bases, nylon chassis, chrome finishes, and a full track system with power boosters, mountain hairpin bends, space leaps, and a 13-story sky park. Technically, They were the fastest small-scale cars available. Mettoy had invested heavily in tooling for 33 models and 39 accessories. Mattel sued, and won. A judge found that Mattel held patent rights over flexible plastic track systems. In what feels like a grim act of mercy, the court reportedly allowed Corgi to sell through Christmas before enforcing the cease and desist. The entire range died after roughly 2 years. All that tooling rendered useless by a courtroom ruling. The supreme irony: those failed rockets now command the highest auction prices of any Corgi product. A James Bond, On Her Majesty's Secret Service 4-car set sold for £3,600 on eBay in 2010. Failure, it turns out, is excellent for scarcity value. And then, as if the universe had decided to confirm that Corgi's luck had genuinely turned, the warehouse caught fire. On the 10th of March 1969, a disastrous blaze broke out at the Queensway warehouse in Swansea, destroying over a year's worth of stock awaiting delivery. Retailers who'd been expecting Corgi shipments turned instead to Dinky to fill the gap on their shelves. Repair costs exceeded £1,300,000, an enormous sum for a company already under pressure. The factory didn't return to full production until 1971. This came at the worst possible time. The one moment when Corgi needed every unit it could produce to fight back against Hot Wheels, a warehouse full of finished stock went up in flames, and the shelf space that Corgi lost was shelf space it would never fully reclaim. Some analysts later suggested that without the fire, the company might never have faced the terminal decline that ultimately killed it. That's unknowable. What is certain is that the combination, Hot Wheels rewriting the market, the Rockets lawsuit destroying their best competitive response, and the warehouse fire wiping out a year of inventory, landed within 18 months of each other. Any one of them was survivable. All three together began something that couldn't be stopped. Through the 1970s, the pressure only compounded. The 1973 oil crisis sent the cost of zinc, plastic, and transport spiralling. Cheap imports from the Far East undercut British-made products on price. Children were changing, more demanding, exposed to more media, surrounded by more exotic toys. Star Wars action figures arrived in 1977. Electronic toys followed. Home video games crept toward the horizon. The upper age at which children bought die-cast cars dropped steadily, year after year. Kids were aging out faster. The market Corgi depended on was shrinking at both ends, squeezed from below by cheaper foreign products, and from above by a generation of children who'd moved on to things that flickered on screens. Chapter 8. The Dragon That Ate Its Master. When Philip Ullman retired as chairman in 1969, he was succeeded by H.J. Isner. Arthur Katz continued as managing director until 1976, when his son Peter took over. It was a natural succession, father to son, founder to heir, and for 2 years it appeared to be working. Peter Katz declared 1978 the company's best ever year. Profit of £3.5 million. No one at the time had reason to doubt him, but the foundations beneath those numbers were already cracking. In 1971, Mettoy had reported its first ever trading loss, £441,000. The Northampton factory on Stanley Road was closed, with 900 jobs lost. That loss was treated as a one-off, a bad year, not a trajectory. Turnover continued to climb through the 70s, 9,300,000 in 1972, 19,900,000 by 1976. The headline numbers looked healthy. The product, if you looked closely, did not. Cost-cutting was becoming visible in the models themselves. The James Bond DB5 was retooled for a fourth time in 1978, and the decline in quality was tangible. The machine guns no longer protruded properly from behind the indicators. The rear bulletproof screen was thinner. Across the range, models carried fewer features, less innovation, less of the obsessive detail that had made Corgi's name. The company was spending less to make each car, and children could feel the difference in their hands. A Corgi from 1965 felt heavy, cold, and intricate, a small machine. A Corgi from 1979 felt lighter, simpler, less worth keeping. Then came the decision that killed the company. Tony Clark, a division manager at Mettoy, had been watching the electronics market. His original idea was modest. He wanted to create Mettoy's own version of Speak and Spell, the Texas Instruments educational toy. He contacted Motorola in Scotland. The conversations grew. The ambition expanded. By 1981, the plan was no longer a toy. It was a full home computer. A prototype was built at PA Technology in Cambridge by an engineer named Ian Thompson Bell. It was originally designed with 16 kilobytes of memory. Then Sinclair announced the 48 kilobyte Spectrum, and the spec was hastily upgraded to 32 kilobytes. The Mettoy board held a pivotal meeting at the 1981 Personal Computer World Show. The directors watched, as one account records, hundreds of kids hammering away at keyboards, programming micros in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. They approved full production. The Dragon 32 launched in August 1982. Mettoy's own injection moulding machines made the cases. Race Electronics assembled the circuit boards. Initial sales were strong, 40,000 units sold by spring 1983 through Boots, Dixons and Comet. Dragon Data, the subsidiary Clark had created, briefly became the largest privately owned company in Wales. For a moment, a brief, intoxicating moment, it looked like Mettoy had found the future. But by October 1982, the core toy business finances were, in the company's own assessment, getting worse. Banks refused additional finance. The home computer market was saturating fast. Sinclair, Acorn, Commodore and a dozen others were all fighting for the same customers. And Dragon, for all its initial momentum, was a toy company's computer in a market increasingly dominated by technology firms. What happened next carries the particular cruelty of a tragedy, where the victim creates the weapon that destroys them. Mettoy was forced to sell Dragon Data, the one subsidiary that was actually generating revenue, to cover the mounting losses from everything else. The profitable thing had to be sacrificed to feed the dying thing. Dragon Data was restructured and taken over by a consortium. Prutech, the Prudential's venture capital arm, took 41%. Hill Samuel and the Welsh Development Agency took stakes. Mettoy was left holding just 15.5% of the company it had created. Clark stepped down for personal reasons. A GEC executive, Brian Moore, replaced him on what was described as temporary secondment. The company had built something that worked, sold it to fund the business that didn't, and was left with neither. Dragon Data continued independently for another year before its own collapse in 1984. The computer that was supposed to save Mettoy outlived Mettoy by exactly 12 months. Meanwhile, the financial hemorrhage at the core business accelerated beyond any hope of recovery. In 1980, a loss of £2,800,000 and over £7 million in lost turnover. In 1981, a further loss of £2,750,000. By 1982, accumulated losses had reached roughly £8 million over 3 years, with total debts of £10.5 million. The workforce, which had peaked at 3,500 in 1968, was cut to 955. Warehouses at Northampton and Skewen were shuttered in 1981. Remaining Northampton staff were relocated to Swansea. The design group, Van Kleemput's team, the people who had conceived every Corgi model since 1956, ceased to exist altogether. Arthur Katz, now in his 70s, ceased to act on the board in December 1980. His departure coincided precisely with the catastrophic loss. Peter Katz left the board in September 1982, removing the last family connection to the founders. Bernard Handsome, who had served on the board from 1972 to 1976, was desperately reappointed in August 1982 as a rescue attempt. Too late. The company tried selling assets. Wembley Playballs, Playcraft Limited, and Rosedale went to Tam Wade in 1983. But the asset sales couldn't stanch the bleeding. The creative engine was dead. The founding families were gone. The debts were insurmountable. and the James Bond Aston Martin DB5, retooled, cheapened, diminished, but still recognisably the model that had defined the brand, was still rolling off the production line. The company's greatest triumph was literally the last thing being made when the end came. Chapter 9. Halloween. The official receiver was called in on the 31st of October 1983. Halloween. An unintentionally grim date for the death of a company that had spent 27 years making childhood magical. Accumulated losses of approximately £8 million. Debts of £10.5 million. 955 workers left, down from 3,515 years earlier. The receivership was not a surprise. It was the formality that followed the long dying. Corgi was the last to fall. But it didn't fall alone. Dinky Toys, the original, the market leader, the Liverpool-made rival that Corgi had spent its entire existence trying to surpass, had collapsed in 1980. Lesney Products, maker of Matchbox, the Hackney-based pocket money brand that Corgi had fought for shelf space, receivership in June 1982. And Louis Marks, which operated from the Fforestfach trading estate, literally next door to Mettoy, closed on the 2nd of January 1981. The government-created industrial estate, designed to replace mining jobs with manufacturing jobs, lost both of its major toy employers within 3 years. The big three of British die-cast, Dinky, Matchbox, Corgi, all gone within 36 months of each other. An entire industry extinguished. Between 1979 and 1982, Wales lost 130,000 jobs. The employment rate fell to 62%. Sterling had appreciated roughly 40% between 1977 and 1980, making British exports savagely uncompetitive. The Mettoy closure was one death among thousands. Coal mines shutting, steelworks closing, the light manufacturing that was supposed to replace heavy industry now failing in its turn. On the Fforestfach estate itself, the pattern was total. Corona, Hodges, Pens, Louis Marks, no sign left. Winsmore, gone. Signode, with its vast plant, was the only original name that survived. UK manufacturing peaked at 8,900,000 workers in 1966, 30% of all employment. The year Corgi sold 17.5 million models. That number now reads less like a statistic and more like an epitaph. A management buyout was assembled in March 1984. The Corgi Toy Company Limited was formed on the 29th of March from the assets of the dead company, led by Mike Rosser as chief executive, backed by Electra Investment Trust, the Welsh office, Investors in Industry, and Lloyds Bank. The Welsh office's participation confirmed what everyone already knew. This wasn't just a commercial rescue, it was political. The factory and the jobs it represented mattered beyond any balance sheet. The new company acquired the Swansea factory, all tools, all machinery, all work in progress. It was rated number 2 in the UK die-cast market. Ross's team focused on quality, high-end collector models, a Corgi collectors club with worldwide membership. In 1987, the National Association of Toy Retailers named Corgi British Toy Company of the Year. It was a genuine achievement, a real recovery. It wasn't enough. Chapter 10. The Predator Consumes the Prey. In December 1989, Mike Rosser's board recommended an offer from Mattel, the company whose Hot Wheels had done more than any other single product to destroy the British die-cast industry. Rosser told stakeholders the deal provided the best future for Corgi. Think about that for a moment. The company that had built the weapon was now buying the corpse. Mattel's interest was not sentimental. Their purpose was strategic elimination. Corgi was the last significant European competitor to Hot Wheels. Buying it removed the threat. Production moved to China in 1990. The first Chinese-made Corgi was an MGA in British racing green. An almost poetic irony. A British car in British colours made on the other side of the world. The Swansea factory and offices closed in January 1991. Operations relocated to Mattel's UK headquarters in Leicester. The Fforestfach factory, opened by King George VI in 1949, where 3,500 workers had once assembled miniature Aston Martins and Batmobiles by hand, fell silent. 42 years of continuous production ended by a corporate decision made in El Segundo, California. Under Mattel, Corgi models appeared in the Hot Wheels Auto City line. By 1994, most of the 1:64 scale tooling had been absorbed into the Hot Wheels range entirely. Some Corgi castings, the actual physical moulds, the ones cut by Welsh toolmakers, appeared as Hot Wheels until 2003. Mattel retained all the 1:64 tooling when Corgi was eventually sold on. The predator didn't just consume the prey, it digested the bones. The brand passed through hands like a parcel nobody wanted to keep. A second management buyout in 1995, led by Chris Guest, sales and marketing director since 1984, backed by venture capitalists Sinven. The new company, Corgi Classics Limited, pivoted entirely to the adult collector market. British TV tie-ins, Mr. Bean's Mini, Inspector Morse's Jaguar, corporate livery vehicles, Eddie Stobart lorries, 1:76 scale buses, over 800 releases by 2007. The product was respectable. It was also unrecognisable. This wasn't the company that had made children's eyes go wide on Christmas morning. It was a nostalgia operation, selling memories of what Corgi used to be to the adults who'd grown up with it. In 1999, Zindart International, a Hong Kong-based collectibles manufacturer listed on Nasdaq, acquired Corgi for £29 million. 9 years later, in 2008, Hornby Hobbies bought it for $8,300,000, less than a third of what Zindart had paid. The brand joined a portfolio alongside Hornby Model Railways, Scalextric and Airfix. All manufacturing in China. All of it. Through all of this, there was Lyndon Davies. Davies started at Mettoy age 16 in the 1970s, learning every facet of die-cast manufacturing from the foundry floor up. He stayed through the receivership. He stayed through the management buyout. He stayed through the Mattel acquisition. He became a director of Microlink Industries, the successor to the factory operation, which itself went into receivership in 1998 with debts of £2 million. In 1993, Davies and two former Mettoy colleagues founded Oxford Diecast in Swansea, literally from the remnants of the old company. He later confirmed, 20 years ago, all of the Oxford employees originated from Corgi Engineering. In 2000, he made what he called the hardest decision, closing the last large-scale die-cast manufacturing operation in South Wales. The skills, the equipment, the institutional knowledge that had produced 1 billion tiny cars, gone from Welsh soil for good. Oxford Diecast continued, designing in Swansea but manufacturing in China, producing 400 to 500 new models per year. Then, in 2017, Lyndon Davies became CEO of Hornby, the conglomerate that owned Corgi. A teenager who'd started on the Mettoy shop floor was now running the company that held the brand. His daughter Eloise became managing director of Oxford Diecast, having, as the family put it, started on the production lines of the Corgi factories at the age of 2. In 2024, Hornby sold Oxford Diecast back to Davies and his family for £1,380,000, calling it a loss-making business, no longer aligned with the core activities of the group. Davies stepped down from the Hornby board. A man who'd given his life to Diecast, from the Mettoy floor to the CEO's office and back again, bought back his own company when the conglomerate decided it wasn't worth keeping. Today, the Corgi brand belongs to Hornby Hobbies, based in Margate, Kent. The Corgi Model Club produces reissues of 1960s models using 3D scanning of originals, die-cast metal, working features, ejector seats, and pop-out guns, roughly £25 each. The reviews are warm. One purchaser wrote, "I brought the gold DB5 for my brother Bruce's birthday. He opened it and he was transported back to his 6th birthday when he got his first one. So happy 67th birthday, Bruce." The standard retail range is another matter. Plastic bases where there was once die-cast metal, no suspension, simplified paint, reduced detail. During the Mattel years, quality declined most sharply. The priority was never to make good corgis, it was to clear the European market for Hot Wheels. What sits on a toy shop shelf today, bearing the Corgi name, would be unrecognisable to Marcel van Kleemput. The weight is wrong. The coldness of zinc in a child's palm, that particular sensation, heavy and mineral and somehow serious, is gone. What remains is a logo on a box, attached to a product made on the other side of the world by people who never heard the Fforestfach hooter or smelled hot mazak at 400 degrees. The factory itself outlasted the company. After the 1991 closure, the buildings at Queensway were repurposed for light industrial use. In February 2000, the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales recorded both main buildings as intact and in a variety of light industrial uses. The shell survived. Then someone filled it with tyres. 5,000 tonnes of shredded tyres stored inside the former Mettoy factory. On the 16th of June 2011, they caught fire. The blaze burned for approximately 3 weeks, not fully extinguished until the 8th of July. The former factory was largely demolished, so firefighters could gain access to the burning material. The cost to Swansea taxpayers exceeded £1.5 to £2 million. Public Health Wales investigated whether local residents suffered increased breathing and heart complaints from the thick black smoke that hung over the site. The building that King George VI opened. The building where Era John packed toy cars in the warehouse. Where Madge Sinclair ran the night shift. Where John Marshall engineered an ejector seat in a week. Where 3,500 people made 17.5 million miniature vehicles in a single year. Demolished. Because of tyres. Chapter 11. What the Zinc remembers today, the Aztec Business Centre occupies the Queensway address. Vehicle repair shops, spray booths, building contractors, small businesses doing small things in a space designed for something vast. The Swansea West Business Park hosts around 140 businesses employing approximately 1,500 people. There is no heritage marker, no plaque, no memorial. No museum display at the site. A world-famous brand with over 1 billion units produced, and the place of its creation has no commemoration whatsoever. Heritage exists elsewhere. The National Waterfront Museum in Swansea includes Corgi Toys in its Made in Wales gallery. Swansea Museum holds plans and prototypes of the James Bond Lotus from 1977. The V&A Museum of Childhood holds the complete Mettoy company archive. The factory appears on the UK Holocaust Memorial Map, a site connected to Jewish refugee heritage. A quiet acknowledgement, buried in a database, of what Philip Ullman and Arthur Katz built after they escaped the darkness. The collector market thrives. A mint-in-box James Bond DB5 fetches up to £400. A factory-sealed pack of 6 achieved 6,400 in 2022. The first issue matte black Batmobile commands 4 figures. A Corgi Rockets Bond set, from the range that Mattel's lawyers killed, holds the auction record at 3,600. A restored model is worth nothing. Condition and original packaging are everything. The box is sometimes worth as much as the toy. Original vintage Corgis have a quality that is impossible to replicate and difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't held one. The weight of zinc alloy in a child's palm. The cold kiss of metal on a winter morning. The tiny click of an opening door on a spring hinge. The mechanical satisfaction of pressing a red button and watching a plastic figure eject through a roof panel. These were small machines, made by people who understood pressure and precision, cast from molten metal in a factory that shook with the rhythm of its own output. They were engineered to be played with, and they were built to survive it. 2 Jewish refugees fled Nazi Germany. They found sanctuary in a country that gave them space to work, and they built something remarkable, a toy company named after a Welsh dog, housed in a factory opened by a king, staffed by the wives and daughters of miners, producing miniature cars that defined British childhood for a generation. The brand won 3 Queen's Awards for export. The factory employed thousands. The products numbered in the billions. The company was destroyed by a combination of foreign competition it couldn't match, a fire it couldn't recover from, a computer it couldn't afford, and a series of decisions by men who inherited something extraordinary and didn't know how to keep it alive. The brand was sold to the company that had killed it. The factory was filled with shredded tyres and burned to the ground. There is no plaque at Fforestfach. There is no memorial. There is only the zinc. Somewhere in attics across Britain, in shoeboxes and display cabinets, and the back of kitchen drawers, millions of tiny gold Aston Martins still carry the weight of what was made there. Cold to the touch. Heavy in the hand. The last physical evidence that any of it happened at all.